Once cars built by some famous British brands had reached the end of their production run in Britain, you'd imagine that the tooling and equipment to build them would probably get scrapped. But I'm going to tell you about 8 cases where those cars were actually reborn and built again in other parts of the world. So first up we have the SD1, which was the flagship of the Rover range between 1976 and 1986. And when Rover saw the end of production coming up, they did a deal with Standard Motor Products of India to sell them 12,000 sets of body panels. And they relaunched the car in India as the Standard 2000. And it was 2000 because they were putting in a standard 2000cc engine. Now the only problem was, that was the standard engine from the UK, which I believe was first seen in the 1947 Standard Vanguard. So you got like a 70s design with a 40s engine. Not a great idea, but hey, it was horribly underpowered, 83 horsepower apparently. But they got it in production in 1985. They only produced 11. Following year 86 they produced 1500. Following year again, 87 they produced 1000, and then it all went pear-shaped. Turned out Standard had faked the emission figures for this car. Obviously 30 years ahead of their time there compared to Volkswagen when they decided to do it. And there was a bit of a government inquiry and ultimately production got shut down. Now there is a slight happy ending to this. All the remaining body panels were purchased a few years later by Rimmer Brothers, the famous part supplier, and brought back to the UK, so people were able to have them spare parts for their SD1 restorations. At number 2 we have the Roots Arrow group, so that's the Hillman Hunter and Minx and the Singer, Gazelle and Vogue, which are effectively all the same body shell but different sort of twinkly bits on each one. Now this car was in production in the UK between 1966 and 1979. But since 1966, they had been selling complete knockdown kits, basically kits in a box, to Iran. And they had been selling it under the name Paykan, which was Iranian for arrow. So obviously carried the same name across. They decided to step up and put in full production from 1985. But by that time, of course, Roots Group, which were owned by Chrysler, had then sold out to Peugeot. So they owned the rights to the car and they said, yeah, that's fine, you can build it. However, you need to use a Peugeot engine, which is what they did. And it fairly much sort of carried on as it was. They did update the front end a little bit, make it a little bit more modern. But saloon production finally ended in 2005. But they had also come up with a pickup version. And that carried on until, would you believe, 2015. So that car definitely had a very long life. The third car we're going to look at is the only sports car on the list, and that is the Lotus Elan, the M100 version. Now this was in UK production between 1989 and 1995, and once that had ended they then sold the rights onto the Kia company of South Korea, and they relaunched the car in 1996 where they had swapped out the 1.6 litre Isuzu turbo engine for a 1.8 litre normally aspirated Maestro engine. And they sold it on as the Kia Elan. They did also sell it on in Japan as the Vigato. Now production really wasn't big numbers. It ended in 1999 and they had by that point only produced 1,056. Next up we've got the Austin, later Rover, Maestro, and this was in UK production between 1982 and 1994. And then in 1994, Rover Group entered a joint venture agreement with a Bulgarian company and created Rodacar. And this was a 15 million investment from Rover. And they were going to set up a factory in Bulgaria where they were going to assemble kits that were sent over from the UK, similar to what we've heard before on the other cars. This factory was opened to great fanfare in September 1995. But unfortunately production ended just a few months later in April 1996 when just 2,200 cars had been produced. So what went wrong? Well, there seems to be lots of stories around this one. The main ones that keep cropping up are that the Bulgarian government had agreed to purchase a large number of cars for their own use, and they failed to follow through on that. And they'd also agreed to lower tariffs for these cars being brought in as kits, and they failed to do that as well. And this isn't the first time that we'll hear about Rover Group being done over on a deal, not doing the detail right by the sounds of it. And the other problem was the Bulgarian government had lowered tariffs on the recently launched Skoda Felicia that was being imported, so suddenly the Maestro didn't have its place in the market. One side effect of the rotor car collapse was this advert in the Sunday Times offering for sale knockdown kits for Maestro vans 138 and 483 cars. And this offer, I believe, was taken up in a deal that involved Paul Stoddard, one-time owner of Minardi Formula One team, which resulted in these cars being converted to right-hand drive and then sold on in the UK. And there's actually some footage here of Vicky Butler Henderson reviewing the car for Top Gear when it was on sale for just $4,995. However, it refused to die. In 1997, the tooling and production rights of the Maestro were then sold on to the Chinese company Etsong, who were actually mainly a tobacco company, and they wanted to expand their business, and they decided they wanted to go into automotive. And in 2001, they launched the Etsong Lubeo, which, yep, it's the Maestro, it's back again. Basically similar body shell, but it was running Toyota engine and transmission. After a couple of years, 2003, Etsong decided car production wasn't for them, so they sold it on again to First Automotive Works, and they then put it back in production. I'm going to have to read this, the Jiefang CA6400UA, and that continued in production until 2006, some 24 years after it was first produced in the UK. The fifth car in our list is probably the most famous car that's gone on to be produced elsewhere. It's the Morris Oxford Series 3, and that was produced in the UK between 1956 and 1959. And at the end of the production, they sold the rights and tooling onto the Hindustan company in India, and they relaunched it as the Ambassador. And they'd already had some history with Morris products, as they'd had the Series 2 Morris Oxford and been producing that over there as the Landmaster. Now, the car carried on pretty much unchanged. It had its most significant facelift in 1979 when it became the Mark IV. In 1980, it received a diesel engine, and in 1992, it then received a 1.8 litre petrol engine to replace the original British engine that it had been using up until then. And it basically just carried on in production up until 2014. Now, by far the most modern car in our list is the Rover 75, and this was produced in the UK between 1998 and 2005, when of course MG Rover went pop. Now, the interesting thing in the background is, in late 2004, MG Rover were negotiating with Shanghai Automotive for a joint venture which was going to hopefully secure the future of MG Rover. But in advance of that joint venture being signed, MG Rover agreed to sell the rights to the Rover 75 to Shanghai Automotive, who then subsequently pulled out of the joint venture, having basically got the family silver that they wanted, and of course subsequently MG Rover went under. Now they got the 75, they relaunched it in 2006 as the Rowe, or I've also heard this pronounced as Wrong Way. I'll let you discuss that. 750. Now, this car was 4 inches longer. I think, I understand, basically in the back door, because that was a Chinese thing, but used basically the 2.5 litre V6 and 1.8 K series based engines that it had been using in the UK. They also modified the rear styling. This apparently was to suit local tastes. And the car continued in production all the way through until 2016. Now at 7, we've got a car that I wasn't actually aware had gone back into production, and that is the Vauxhall Victor VX series, the FE version, which is also the Ventura, etc. VX 490 as well, I think. And that was in UK production between 1972 and 1978. Now, Hindustan, them of ambassador fame, were looking for a more modern car to add to their range, and they bought the rights, tooling, etc. for the VX series. Now, they put it into production in 1984 as the Hindustan Contessa. The only problem was, the only engine they had was the British Motor Company 1.5 litre engine that was in the Ambassador, and at 50 horsepower it struggled a bit to drag that big old Vauxhall design along. But they put it to market. In the late 80s it did get the Isuzu engine, the 1.8 litre one, and then in the 90s they did introduce a diesel version. They did upgrade the car quite a lot over the years. They gave it electric windows, power steering, air conditioning, etc, etc. But ultimately production ended on that one in 2002. Now, last up we have the Triumph Herald, which was produced in the UK between 1959 and 1971. Now, in parallel to UK production, the Standard Motor Company of India, who we heard about earlier with the SD1, they had been producing a Herald version, but had been gradually modifying it with more and more indigenous parts, and actually had created their own four-door version. Now, after UK production ended in 71, in 72, Standard launched their own updated version called the Gazelle. Slightly tweaked the front styling, did quite a lot to the back styling, so it enabled them to use locally made rear lights. And also they replaced that rather infamous swing axle rear suspension with leaf springs. Now, initial production really wasn't big numbers. It was about 3,000 a year, and then it dropped off quite quickly. By sort of 1976 it was only about 160, and production stopped in 1979 when really it was down to single digit numbers. I hope you've enjoyed that look at those cars that went on to be reborn elsewhere in the world. A couple of those, before I researched, I wasn't even aware of. So I hope you found that of interest. And if you have, please give that like button a tickle, and the same with the subscribe. And I'll catch you next time.